episode of Palmetto Politics. I'm Shannon Grady, and that is.
John Cummings, hello.
And we want to talk to you about a few things today. Before we get started, let's talk about our sponsor, Sports Replayed, where sports are played and replayed. Make yourself available to any sport or any game that you'd like to be involved in. And you can drop by at 1119 3rd Avenue, Conway, South Carolina, and pick up your sporting equipment. Or if you have something that's gently pre-owned, bring it by and trade it in for something else or for a little cash to put in your pocket. So that takes us to our first topic today. I'm going to go ahead and leap on this. John and I were just having a discussion. It's hot in the news. It's in all the presses, and we're both discussing it. John, let's talk a little bit about Representative Harris's proposed bill, or what we know of it so far. Representative Harris out of Spartanburg has put forward an amendment to House Bill 3549. Is that what it was?
Yeah, well, it's an amendment to the Prenatal Equal Protection Act of 2023, sponsored by Representative Harris. This is a House bill, and there are, I'm just looking really quick, it looks like there's about 12 co-sponsors. And basically what the intent is to strengthen protections for unborn children. But with that, when you try to increase or solidify the idea that the unborn child is exactly that, a person, what you're doing, what the bill ends up doing, and I'm sure it's intentional, is that you end up categorizing that as a homicide, an abortion, as a homicide, understood. But with that, because of the premeditation part of the homicide, obviously the abortion would be premeditated. If you are a woman and or doctor that participates in an abortion and the child's life is terminated, you would be subject to murder charges. Now, of course, in South Carolina, with murder charges comes the death penalty. So that is a slope that is going to be really difficult, I think, for a lot of people to deal with. I think that's quite a leap as we head into this uncharted territory of not having, Roe versus Wade on the books. Each state is trying to establish their own laws and parameters, but that one, at least for me, is one that causes me to take pause.
Yeah, I know your Catholic faith, and I'm a Christian myself, bears out that life is important, and we value life at all costs. So having taken a life in an abortion then equals taking another life. I know that I'm struggling with that one, and like you said, I understand what they're trying to do in terms of strengthening this pro-life legislation. But I'm just picturing in my mind a 16-year-old, 15-year-old girl pregnant, going and having an abortion, and now she's potentially going to be charged with murder and facing the death penalty. I don't know.
Yeah, and the fact that it hit the national news in
Yeah.
about an hour
Yeah.
shows you that everybody's keyed in on this particular topic, and they're looking to states like South Carolina, which have the reputation for being conservative states, even though that's probably not the case, at least at the legislative level. They're looking right at this, and it really, I think what it really does is solidifies their case as people who are pro-life as being hypocritical. I think you just threw them a major bone, if you will, in that you're saying, hey, wait a minute, you're pro-life, but you want to execute some woman who's 18, 19, 20 years old, and possibly the doctor who performed the illegal abortion. You want to put them on death row. I mean, I understand that perhaps they'd probably insert an exemption into that, or sort of exception. Perhaps they should. But from my perspective, and I mean, I might catch some grief on this, and it doesn't really matter. I cannot equate that. I know the intent is good, but I cannot equate that to somebody walking into a bank, holding up the bank, and shooting people. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to solidify the fact that an unborn child is a person who's afforded all of the rights under the Constitution. Now, I probably should have said up front, I'm not a death penalty guy anyway. I'm just not,
Right.
and that's a religious thing for me. I'm just not. I think that if someone is in a position where they commit a murder one, first degree murder, you should be life with no parole. Put them in a box, a 12 by 10 cement box, and push their meals under the door for the rest of their lives. And that's just the way I feel about it. God forbid that we, the people and the jury, were wrong. I mean, that's one you can't take back. So I'm not a death penalty person anyway. But to equate that to someone who, shoots a police officer during a car stop, or like I said, a holdup, or anything premeditated, especially, that's a rough one. And I think, very when we're in this uncharted territory, you kind of have to take smaller steps here.
I'd be really interested, and maybe we can get either Representative Harris or Representative Jones, somebody to come on and kind of explain their position, their reasoning behind this, because I think part of me says, okay, let's look at this from their vantage point, where they're saying, look, we're trying to save the life of the child, and we put this in place so that puts up this wall of protection that says, hey, if you do this, you're likely, why can't we make it negligent homicide, something that is still homicide, but it does not, the penalty is not death. I don't know. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, it's tough.
I'm having a hard time swallowing that one
yeah, I think you'd have to rewrite it so, the premeditation in this case is at least different than a premeditation in a murder case, or as most cases go, if you're committing a felony and you take someone's life during the commission of a felony, that makes it a top level murder, and then you are subject to the death penalty. To me, like I said, I respect the idea, but this is not that.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that we're going to look more closely at. And I have not like South Carolina's not getting enough scrutiny right now with national attention, but this is certainly going to bring eyeballs on to our state.
And I also think when it comes to trying to get some new laws into place after Roe versus Wade, this is an amendment. It might slow things down, because I would imagine that there are some very conservative people like you and me who would probably look to vote this bill down because of the amendment that was added. That's always the problem with amendment processes. When you start sticking things on fairly popular bills, they become unpopular, and that's how things don't get done in the legislature. And I understand the pause here, but that's a rough one. And I think if you put that to the public just the way it is, if this is the case, because very often, the media will take that and run with it, even though it's not the case.
Right.
It's really something that we have to look further into. I was even hesitant to talk about it because I haven't done my due diligence on it, because it came out. So, I saw it this morning, and we didn't have time before show prep. We weren't even going to talk about this.
Right.
But because it was so prevalent on the news, I think we had to take a look at it. And on its face, that's a rough one.
Yeah, like I said, I would love to be able to talk with one of the sponsors of this bill to get their explanation, and maybe they can clear up some of the confusion and explain away some of our concerns. But at any rate, it is certainly going to be a national news story for quite some time, even until it's defeated or passed or whatever the case may be. It'll be interesting. We already had one heartbeat bill basically defeated by our state Supreme Court, in large part due to one of our outgoing Supreme Court justices, Karen Hearn. I think, is it Kay or Karen? Anyway,
Kay Hearn.
Yeah, I think it's Kay Hearn. Yeah, she voted to remove that because it violated, she felt like, rights. But anyway, this would certainly be a pretty drastic step. I'm just still trying to grapple with it in my mind and try to understand the logic, because I, like you, I am pro-life, and I believe every life is important and valued. And obviously I see myself in a situation where I imagine my mother, as an example, is someone who comes in and shoots and kills her. I mean, the anger, the frustration, because that was my mom. I'm probably going to be advocating for whoever did it to be, killed as well. But that's a very personal, rational, irrational, actually, a thought process, because ultimately we should value all life. But sometimes I know when something's really heinous, you think, this guy gunned down people or he tortured them, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're going to value life, you have to value all life. So, but it'll be interesting. So folks, we're not passing judgment on this. We're just talking about it because it's in the news. We want to certainly do some more research and try to give the sponsors of this bill an opportunity to clarify or explain their position, so that we know that this is exactly what was said, and that it wasn't just hyperbole put out by the mainstream media, because they do that sometimes.
No.
Right. Exactly.
I'm stunned.
Right. Well, in talking about some of the things that gets put out, that is often hyperbole and anything but the truth. I received in my mail, I don't know if you got one as well, but I got this mail flyer from Senator Goldfinch, who is my senator. And, very simple, leading on what matters, and taking action on conservative policies, defending the unborn, keeping South Carolina safe, protecting the Second Amendment, expanding school choice, securing our elections, lowering taxes. Well, I'm not sure that those things are true. In fact, I'm fairly confident that they're anything but true, because I have in my hand the voting records of all of these state senators, Goldfinch, Rankin, and Hembry. And at least so far this year, they haven't even had an opportunity to vote on the Second Amendment. John, didn't it just leave the House? I mean, am I mistaken?
Yeah, it has to go to the House now. The constitutional carry when it went through the House, and it has to go to the Senate now, rather. So we will see if Senator Goldfinch puts his money where his mouth is, or where his flyer is, anyway.
Yeah, and not to be too critical on Senator Goldfinch, but probably the most shocking is that Senator Rankin got the same mailer sent out. Now, I can tell you, point of fact, I've looked through his voting record. He is not for defending the unborn. He is not for protecting the Second Amendment. He is a Democrat in every one of those categories in terms of how he voted. He was a named Democrat until 2004, when again he was forced to switch to Republican because he realized the winds had shifted and he couldn't win anymore as a Republican, so he decided to run as he couldn't win anymore as a Democrat, so he decided to run as a Republican. But his voting has not changed. He has continued to vote very liberal. As I mentioned previously, CPAC ranked him significantly lower than two other actual Democrats in our state, in our Horry delegation. So this is a patently false flyer. Luke Rankin does not defend the unborn. He does not believe in protecting the Second Amendment. So, and I could go through every one of these votes and demonstrate to you. I mean, in fact, I was looking at it, and I was looking at how many times he voted no on the amendment for saving the unborn. And in fact, I noticed the few times that he did vote yes were to table the amendment, which, if you don't know what that means, it means to kill it.
We just leave it over there and we'll ignore it. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't, I thought to myself, who put this out? Who sent this out? So let's zoom in and take a look at who sent out this fraudulent flyer, because it's just flat out, it's a lie. It's not true. So I zoomed in. Let me see if I can find that.
And I love some of them. Some of them are so broad. Keeping South Carolina safe. No, we want to make South Carolina more dangerous. So, I mean,
exactly. So in the left-hand corner at the bottom there, you'll see it says paid for by the South Carolina Republican Caucus. Now we're going to look into exactly where that money comes from, because John, you were saying earlier, you kind of explain what you were saying about mailers and how that works at the federal level.
At the federal level, you get franking and mailing privileges, which means you get free mailing if you're a member of the House of Representatives. And basically, they put that in place so you can update your constituents on exactly what you're doing. Now, it can't be a campaign-style flyer, meaning that you can't say, I support this, I support this, I support. They want specifics. Now, of course, people take advantage of that, and it's one of the great advantages that incumbents have when they're running for re-election anyway, is they get free mailing, and anybody who's challenging them, they have to raise the money to do any type of mailing. So that's a built-in advantage for incumbents at the federal level. There is a distinction between updating constituents and putting out and out campaign flyers. Now, at the state level, we have to dig into who exactly pays for this. What is the Senate Republican Caucus? Where does the money come from? And who authorized this, by the way? It says it right on the card.
Well, yeah, and that's what I wanted to get to next. So, we're going to look into exactly how this is funded in terms of, are they paying dues into the South Carolina Senate Republican Caucus? Are we, the constituents, paying, donating money to that caucus? Exactly where is their funding? Where does it originate? But the next thing that drew my attention was authorized by authorized by the South Carolina GOP. So my first thought as the state executive committee woman was, did Drew call for a vote and I'm unaware of it? Did he call to have all of the state ECs vote to authorize this mailer? Or is this something he did unilaterally and just said, well, I'm Drew McKissick, the chair, and therefore ominous, boom, this is authorized? Because putting that stamp on there says to me hey, folks, the Republican Party backs this, and we agree with what's printed on this flyer. And I'm telling you right now, it's false. It's not true.
Yeah,
Luke
and
Rankin does not support preborn. He does not support Second Amendment rights. He's a Democrat. He's not even, in my opinion, he shouldn't even carry the title of Republican. I wouldn't even call him a rhino. He's below a rhino. I mean, Lindsey Graham's a rhino. Luke Rankin's a Democrat.
right and it leads you right to that whole Freedom Caucus take the loyalty oath pledge. Obviously, those in the Freedom Caucus are not getting these flyers mailed out by the Senate Republican caucus because they were kicked out.
Oh, let's
So,
take a look. I'm glad you mentioned that, John. Let's take a look at what is being mailed out, or actually not mailed out, tweeted out about the Freedom Caucus members. Here we have a text message that was sent out to Representative Stuart Jones saying that he wanted felons to be able to carry in South Carolina. And that couldn't be any further from the truth. It's patently false. What he argued against was allowing misdemeanors, as we discussed last time, misdemeanors to be the thing that would prohibit you from being able to carry. So as we noted previously, if you carry, you get caught trespassing, you write a fraudulent check, there's any number of minor offenses that you could commit that under this piece of legislation could then prohibit you from being allowed to practice your Second Amendment right to carry. So that's why they voted against that particular amendment. But of course, this text message goes out and says, oh no, they voted, they want felons to have guns. No, they didn't. So there is a lot of misinformation. I'll be nice and call it misinformation being sent out against the Freedom Caucus and in favor of individuals whose voting record demonstrates they're anything but conservative. And I, for one, have had enough of it. So that's one of the reasons why you and I attended that meeting, American Conservative Voices, where they had some of the Freedom Caucus members come and speak. And we even have the solicitor from District 1, who is a Democrat, David Pascal, came and spoke. And, they all agree that the way that we fight this continued battle is to inform the public. And so if people are only seeing these mailers, they're going to believe what they're put before them because folks are busy. They got jobs. They got places to be. They don't have time to do the research to look up these votes. And I just want to give you an example. I didn't even print them all out. If I had printed out all the votes from 2021 to 22, each of these senators is like 4 pages, and that's current. That's what they've currently voted on in this particular session so far. I think it was like 60 pages. And look how small that print is, if you can. I don't know if I can zoom in and let you see how small that print is. So imagine 60 pages of these types of votes, because it's every vote. It's not just on a specific bill. It's on amendments for the bills. So things that are, it's not even a full vote yet. It's in committee, as they say. So I didn't print them all out, but just in looking through this session alone, it's clear to me that these guys do not support the things that flyer claimed they support. And that's a problem.
yeah, it is. And it also, like I said, it points to the fact where if you sign the loyalty oath, you have a noted advantage because you're going to get free mailing. That's basically free mailing. It doesn't have to come out of your budget. Everybody gets a budget. I get that. Or you don't have to raise campaign money to do this. But if you're not part of that group, you're at a disadvantage, meaning that you can't do those mailings. That's what it says to me, because the fact that the party endorsed it, at whatever level, I don't know, we don't know who endorsed it, but the fact that that's authorized by the SCGOP and it's paid for by the South Carolina Senate Republican Caucus tells me that they are pointing to the Freedom Caucus and saying, you're not getting this ability to do a mailing to tell everybody what you're doing. We get it, but you don't.
Yeah. Now I took the unprecedented step of reaching out to Hope Walker, who was basically, I'll call her Drew McKissick's right-hand woman. I didn't go to Drew because I don't have his number. I guess I could email him. Doubt I get a response there either. So I sent her a screenshot of the flyer. And in particular, I kind of honed in on the authorized by the SCGOP. And I asked her, I said, so does authorized by the SCGOP mean the state ECs voted to approve these flyers? Or did Drew simply give them authorization without a vote? And I am awaiting a response from Hope. So we'll see. I don't know if you can see that or not, if it's too blurry, but I did send her that. So I'm awaiting a response from Miss Walker. It's only 9:49 in the morning, so maybe she hasn't gotten to the office yet. I'm not anticipating that she's actually going to respond to me, but again, she should. And I am a paying, voter. I have supported the SCGOP, certainly monetarily speaking, in the past. But as I've noted previously, I won't be sponsoring them monetarily any further. I'm going to give any monies that I have for those types of things directly to particular candidates, because I don't like the way they're using the money. And if they're using my money to send out these erroneous flyers, that is very concerning to me. It's very frustrating. And it's not something that I'm okay with. If you're going to send out flyers, at least be honest about it. And why didn't you wait until after they've actually had an opportunity to take up the Second Amendment bill that was passed through the House and sent to the Senate? Why send this flyer out? And I suspect, John, that the reason they sent it out at this time was because they knew when the vote comes to the Senate, they're not going to vote to support that. So I'll be very curious. In fact, I'll probably be making some phone calls to Senator Rankin and Senator Goldfinch and Senator Hembree to ask them why they voted the way they did for Second Amendment. To that end, I will say this. I had put out a notice last time when we talked. I had noted that Representative Case Britton had voted present, and everybody else had voted in support of the bill. So he did reach out to me and called me, and he said that the reason why he had voted present was because he had some concerns about how this would affect the police officers, SLED in particular, and their ability to use probable cause. I wasn't really clear on his explanation, but at least I heard his explanation, and he did at least call me to give it. It sounded like he was arguing that the SLED folks said, listen, if we got a group of guys standing around, they've got a weapon on their hip, at this point in time, we can go over there and ask them, hey, what are you doing? We have probable cause. And I thought, I worked in law enforcement. John, is that probable cause?
Well, it depends. You're going to laugh. It depends on the loitering statutes.
Yeah, you're right.
That's what it depends on. I can only tell you, up in New York,
Yeah.
I think it was if you had more than 5 people on a street corner.
Yeah.
This is the way the law read. You're going to love this. If you had more than 5 people standing on a street corner, you could be arrested for loitering, or at least summoned, and get a desk appearance ticket, unless you had an American flag.
Okay, so the American flag.
That's the way the law read. You could have 20 people standing on the corner. If you had a flag, it's okay.
All right,
that's the way the law read.
Listen, John, I half expected you to say if you have an American flag, only 2 people could be. Yeah, and then haul you off.
We used to pull up to the corner and tell guys, "Have you guys seen a flag?" And they'd look at us like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah. But, so anyway, that was Case Britton's defense, was that he was concerned about how those impact the ability of officers of the law to perform their duties. He did subsequently, on third reading, vote yes. The bill, as we noted last time, passed through the House, and it is now constitutional carry is on its way to the Senate. Now, I want to reiterate, I have deep concerns about the amendment placed on that, which says, again, that if you've committed a misdemeanor, that can lead to your being stripped of your Second Amendment rights to carry. And again, folks, they were very broad in that. A misdemeanor can be trespassing. Imagine that you're 18 years old, you go to a party, you have a couple of drinks, you go outside, particularly guys, and you relieve yourself. If a police officer happens to walk up while you're in the process of doing that, you can be charged with indecent exposure. And now that's a misdemeanor. You can't carry. You're 45 years old. They're going to tell you, hey, when you're 18, you did this thing, and so therefore we're not going to allow you to carry. Further, reckless driving is another example. And so I always think in terms of how could this be used to limit our freedom by the government. One of the things that's a misdemeanor is reckless driving. So imagine that you are a well-known person. Let's say that your last name starts with a C and maybe your first name starts with a C, and you have a show called I'm Fired Up. And so you're well known by a lot of folks. Let's say that they ask a particular officer to follow behind your vehicle, and that officer follows, and at some point in time, you swerve, make a slight deviation on the road, bam, they pull you over, blue lights. Yes, sir, you are driving recklessly. Here's your bill. Here's your ticket. Here's your summons. You could very easily be entrapped into a lot of these things. So that concerns me. I felt the same way whenever we passed the what was it called? The Patriot Acts. Is that what they were called? Whenever we had 9/11, and it was like, if you made a phone call, they could listen in. Now, I remember initially when that happened, I was very angry, and I think all Americans were angry. And you being a New Yorker, I'm sure you were especially angry. And my initial thought was, you know what, you can listen to my calls. I wasn't talking to any foreigners. And then I took a moment to pause, and I thought, you know what, wait a minute, because how is this going to affect us long term? Right now, we have a president that I trust who wouldn't use it against us. And now, in hindsight, that was probably foolish of me to trust anybody, even the Bushes. But I don't think that's a good power to bestow upon any government. And given how we've seen the FBI behave, there's no government entity that I believe should have that kind of power. And of course, we could talk about the wireless taps that they used without warrants. They didn't even get a warrant. They just been listening in on our phone calls. So again, going back to this Second Amendment constitutional carry, I don't like that misdemeanor clause because it does allow way too much leeway. But you and I did discuss that we felt like things like stalking, any kind of assault, simple battery, any of those things that are physical, absolutely, you shouldn't be allowed to carry a weapon because you have exhibited behaviors that are not safe. So they could have honed in, narrowed that a little bit, and I would have been okay with it. But right now it's too broad. And I just see that as a potential for them to strip away our constitutional carry rights.
Yeah, if there were a couple of exceptions that you wanted to put in the bill, a couple of misdemeanors, and I mean a couple, not a lot.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, maybe. But they should have just left it to felonies. They should have just left it to felonies. Even in this, there's nothing more serious than domestic violence. It's obviously a massive problem. But there are cases where women make allegations against men or vice versa, that are not true, and they do it, involving cases, etc. So now someone makes an allegation against you, and you are no longer allowed to carry a firearm because you were charged with a misdemeanor, and as it turns out, it was. You find out later on that it was bogus. Yeah, look, felonies are felonies for a reason, and misdemeanors are misdemeanors for a reason.
Right.
So they should have just drawn the line there and left it. And that was it. Like you said, whenever you're giving flexibility to what in many cases is an overbearing government, we the people are always going to pay the price for that.
Right. Now, I had an attorney on our page who was actually talking with another individual about constitutional carry, and he said there is no need for any state law to grant you an authority that's already given to you in the Constitution. We already have the right to carry. It's called the Second Amendment. So there's not a need for an additional law at the state level to grant you that authority that's already given to you in the Constitution. Well, this person argued back with the attorney and said, well, yeah, but what about the fact that there are going to be people that will now have a weapon who don't know how to use it, who don't know how to safely carry it or conceal it or open carry it or whatever? And he said, I understand that. But the Constitution is clear. It doesn't say you have the right to bear arms unless you don't know how to use it. It doesn't say you have the right to bear as long as you've had, a course. It doesn't say that. So he then said the onus is then placed on the owner of the weapon to go out and get that training, to get that knowledge of where you can carry, where you cannot carry, because there are certain places that, regardless of the Second Amendment, you can't carry. You cannot carry your weapon into a school, cannot carry it into an airport, cannot carry it into any government building. So there are some hospitals, things like that. There are some places that you cannot carry. And you need to be aware of that, or you can get yourself into serious legal trouble. So I do think it's important that you be educated, that you be informed. But I also agree that you need to take that on yourself. You as a citizen need to understand if you're going to carry, you have to be prepared for consequences of not knowing the safe ways in which to carry. Now, people can argue, well, Shannon, that's going to lead to, a lot of people getting arrested for foolishly, walking into their school to pick up their child and they got their weapon on their hip. You know what? That's only going to have to happen a couple of times. And guess what? People are going to be like, hey, did you know?
People be more careful. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I myself, and I spoke with Representative Britton about this. And I said, I do have some concerns about people not knowing how to use a weapon. And this attorney kind of refuted that. And I found myself having to agree with him because I had even said the case. Look, I think the biggest beef that people have with being required to have a license or being required to take courses is that you got to pay for these things. So I said, what if instead of having to pay for it, like you mentioned this, that you create some kind of online course where you go on there and it's free, it doesn't cost you anything. And it's an hour-long course that basically goes through where you can carry, what you can do, what you cannot do, so on and so forth. And every 5 minutes, you got to click the button to get it to go. That way, you know, somebody doesn't start the video and go off and watch a TV show and come back when it's over. They're actually having to at least come by every 5 minutes and click the button. Doesn't, again, mean that they're actually going to watch it, but it is something. It is something. So that was something that I thought made sense. But I don't believe, based on the Constitution, I don't think we can even require that, because I agree with this attorney that the Constitution is the Constitution. It trumps everything. And now let's go to New York, for example. I know you have experience there. In New York, did they not strike down the restrictions that they had for being able to own a weapon? Did the Supreme Court not do that?
Yeah, and laws are very tight up there. But when you have a carry permit, a full carry permit, which I had in New York because I was retired law enforcement, you can carry your gun anywhere. You can go into church, a school, a shopping mall, and it's concealed. It's a concealed carry permit. There are no open carry permits in New York. You don't get to walk around with a sidearm in New York.
Right.
It's concealed. You can't assume that, you know, whoever it is isn't carrying a weapon. So it's totally different up there. And then they have different levels. They also have in New York what's called a premise permit, which means if you own a business, you can have a gun in the store.
Right.
But when you leave at night, you have to lock it up in the safe, and it stays in the store.
Well, what was the Supreme Court? What did the Supreme Court strike? They struck down some law in New York, and I can't remember what it was. They said it was unconstitutional because of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I have to go back and look. That they have passed so many unbelievably ridiculous laws in New York since I left that it's hard to keep track of them because they have a super majority on the flip side, on the Democrat side, and they put through stuff in New York that's just mind-boggling. I will say this, you know, Andrew Cuomo, horrible governor. Everybody know. I mean, what went on with the pandemic, a whole nother story.
Right.
But he was kind of sensible. He was kind of the barrier between the radical left and the Democrats. He was kind of the barrier. So he didn't let them push through all of this crazy, even the bail reform stuff. It wasn't until they had him over the barrel with all of those charges that he was, you know, facing with sexual harassment and everything. It wasn't until he was over the barrel that he said, okay, we'll let that in. And now since he's gone, it's just been a waterfall of unconstitutional and unfair legislation. Like I said, I can keep up with it.
Well, and the reason I asked that is because right after the Supreme Court struck down whatever the bill was that dealt with Second Amendment rights, there was a lot of attorneys talking about whether or not that action by the Supreme Court didn't actually include all of the nation, all 50 states, because essentially they upheld that you don't need to have a law to permit you to carry. And that's kind of what this attorney on our page was actually discussing, that you don't need another law. So this constitutional carry that is now before the Senate is not actually even necessary because we have the Constitution, and it says clearly we have the right to bear arms. We do, and that right cannot be abridged. And by abridged, the last time I checked, that means it can't be thwarted. There's nothing, you can't build something that prohibits you from being able to exercise that freedom. So therefore, wouldn't a law that says you have to go through training, or you have to do this, or you have to do that, wouldn't that law prohibit you? Because that's an abridgment of your Second Amendment right. So I think it's high time that we actually push this decision all the way back to the Supreme Court and get a very clear answer from the Supreme Court on what does the Second Amendment grant you? Does it or does it not allow every American citizen the right to own and bear arms? And if that is the case, then every single state from New York to Hawaii to Alaska, South Carolina, Florida, every single state must then follow the Constitution and allow for the carry of weapons by citizens of the United States. Now, we could argue all day long is that people go, oh, now it's going to be the wild, wild west. Well, I don't think that's going to be the case, because there's an old saying that my husband loved to say. He's a retired Army guy. He would always say, a well-armed society is a polite society. If you know everybody in the room is armed, you're going to be much less likely to start flapping your gums and creating some sort of tussle. And they joke and say, in Texas, there was a Oh, it was a commercial that came out, and it was like somebody in a candy store, and they went to open something, and it made a popping sound, like a weapon being discharged. And the camera panned, and everybody in the candy store had their weapons drawn. Only in Texas. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, however true that may be, there's obviously been incidences where, like in El Paso, where we had guys go in and do some terrible shootings. I don't know that having a constitutional carry be established as this is the law of the land and no state can abridge your right to carry, is going to prohibit future shootings or whatever. Because at the end of the day, every single shooting really comes down to a couple of things. And I think one of those that's preeminent is mental health. In almost every instance where you've had a mass shooter, the individual has had some sort of mental problem, whether it's depression, bipolar, whatever the case may be, they've had some issues. And that brings us to what they call as red flag laws. Now, are you familiar with the red flag laws?
Oh, indeed. And it's something that I talked about when I ran for office in 2020 up in New York. Anytime, and this is the way I view things, anytime, this is not a country of lists.
Right.
You should not be put on a list and then have to get yourself off the list.
Right.
Because this country, our entire system is based on innocent until proven guilty. You talked about the Patriot Act. You had people end up on no-fly lists. And I wasn't thrilled with that, even coming off 9/11. I wasn't thrilled with it.
Yeah.
Strictly from a liberty perspective, meaning that you ended up on a list because your name looked like somebody else's and you did nothing wrong. Right. Same thing with the red flag laws. All you have to do is have someone make allegation. It's just an allegation that, hey, this guy, he tends to be violent. This guy has a military background and he flies off the handle. And it's particularly aimed at veterans, to be honest. Yeah. And the fact that you end up on a list and you have to get yourself off the list, for me, is a gross violation of your civil rights.
Yeah. Now, to me, in my mind, I agree with you on the list. I don't think we should have lists. However, recently, in almost every instance where you've had some kind of a shooting, there's been information that came out. Look, this guy was saying things on social media that were red flags that we should have been paying attention to. He was, people at school said, hey, he's got a problem, whatever. I do think that in all of this police, they've been talking about, oh, we need to rework the police. We need to have, what was it they were calling it?
They want social workers out there.
Yes,
they don't want law enforcement.
So here's what I was going to say. This is where those social workers can actually be used and valuable. If you have an incident where someone reports, John has got a temper, he's, gone off the rails easily, whatever, send out little Miss Social Worker to go make a health and wellness check. See how little Johnny's doing. See if little Johnny is amassing an arsenal, and if he comes to the door with things strapped to him, what do you want? Maybe you need to sit down and have a little talk with Johnny. But a wellness check does not equate to a list. It is someone calls in and says, look, this guy's acting very strange. You send out a social worker. Hey, just come in and check on everything okay. And if Johnny says, yeah, everything's fine, then that's it. You've gone out, you've checked. So, but I agree with you. Having a list of people that you say, okay, here's the list of people that have been, reported to have issues, whatever. That's a problem because, like you said, anybody can get upset with someone and turn them in, and there you've got to try to get yourself removed. And from everything I've heard and seen, getting yourself removed from these lists is a nightmare. And that's not how it should be, because it is, as you noted, you are innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around. So in order to get on one of these lists, you need to have been charged with something and found guilty in a court of your peers. Period.
Yeah, and that's why it's so difficult when it comes to medical privacy. That's the line we have to walk here. Obviously, it's very difficult. The idea that someone who has a long history of mental illness can just go out and get a firearm is disturbing. There's no doubt about that. But how you deal with that is something that we as a society have to deal with, because let's face it, our medical privacy is out the door now.
Yep.
And they destroyed that with the vaccines. I mean, they destroyed it. They made lists. People are still on lists that didn't get the shot. People lost their jobs over it.
Oh my God!
So they preached for years. They preached about medical privacy, and then they just stomped all over it. They stomped all over it. So that's something that we have to deal with as a society, as to how far this privacy goes when it comes to people who suffer from serious mental illness. But I will agree with what you said. Almost every major mass shooting in the United States was committed by someone who had a long history of taking psychotropic drugs.
Yep. Now, I've even heard, and I don't want to delve into this too much because it's one of those QAnon theories, but I've heard a lot of people saying that this is intentional, that there is this nefarious organization, underground, whatever, government entity, however you want to claim it, who has been putting out these drugs for the sole purpose of getting people to commit mass shootings. It reminds me of what I had heard when I was in college many years ago.
Yeah,
35 years ago.
there.
Yeah, right. Anyway, there was a young lady in the class that I had who absolutely was adamant that the death penalty was designed solely to eradicate black males. And I said, I don't know how you come up with that assumption based on statistics, because statistically speaking, the majority of people that are executed are actually white males.
Right.
So I'm not really sure, where you, and you know what, you can even argue this point, because I've heard this argued too. If a black person shoots a white person, their sentencing tends to be more severe. Whereas if it's two gang members, two black males, and he shoots a black male, his sentencing is not as severe. So is that because our system devalues black lives? Is it because they devalue gang members? I mean, how does that come to be? But that's an argument for another day. But at any rate, it all goes back to what we're trying to say, is that, look, there is, in my opinion, no need for any law save the Constitution in terms of Second Amendment rights. At the end of the day, at some point in time, somebody, maybe this attorney that's on our page, needs to take this up, go before the Supreme Court. And I think now is a good time, given the type of Supreme Court we have. Now is a good time to fight this, go all the way to the Supreme Court, and once and for all have them declare the Second Amendment is where the buck stops. It does not say you can abridge it in these circumstances. It says it shall not be abridged. You cannot put any things.
And the more we, the people, regain our rights to arm ourselves, the more the left tries to figure out a way to stop it. There have been bills introduced to levy high taxes on ammunition.
Yep.
Another one that's becoming quite popular, and we have to watch out for this at the state level, is there are people introducing legislation, but there are people legislation that would force gun owners to have a liability insurance policy with that you have to pay for. So that would be a deterrent into carrying a weapon, and that
counts as abridged,
right? That type of legislation is being introduced all over the country, the blue states, as it becomes apparent that, as the Supreme Court currently, as it's currently constituted, they're leaning that way into allowing people to carry. Well, you're going to see these laws come out of the woodwork, and they'll do anything they can, the left, to make sure that we, the people, cannot arm ourselves, which is really, look, we can get into a whole discussion about why that's there, but that's another history class for another time.
Right. Yeah. Someone had put up a quote out of Mein Kampf from Hitler, in which he says that the way to strip away liberties is not all at once, but it is, little tiny cuts, nicks, until the people are so, stripped of their liberties that by the time they wake up and realize, wait a minute, I don't have any freedom, it's too late. And of course, one of the first steps of any dictator is to strip away your right to own or possess a weapon. So you're right. We're both history folks, and we clearly understand that is a danger that we want to avoid it at all cost. Well, enough about the Second Amendment at this time. As soon as we find out that bill is moving through the Senate and is being voted on, we'll bring that information to you, but we don't yet have that yet. I did look at their agenda, and it was pretty vague. It didn't say anything about, it didn't even mention what bills they were going to talk about today. So I was pretty disappointed with the online source that you get. And I don't know if that's purposeful, whether our state senators really don't want you to know what they're going to be talking about that day. I know that when we were tracking the fentanyl bill, we had to have Tommy Pope, Representative Pope, constantly update us on where it was in the House, and then he updated us on where it was in the Senate. And that was how we were actually able to track this bill and make sure we had people there to speak on its behalf. So I'd like a little more transparency. So for those legislators who might be listening in or might catch this video later, please do a better job of being transparent about what it is you're going to be talking about in your day-to-day discussions. And that includes what you're going to talk about, Republican caucus members, at the Palmetto House. I want transparency. I don't want to find out that the major negotiations on a particular bill were done behind closed doors without the knowledge or consent of the folks who elect you to go to office. Now, I know some of our legislators seem to think that once they get elected, they have a blank check to do whatever they want because we put them there. That's not how that works. You are a representative. What that means is you represent we the people. And if you do not do a better job of being transparent about what it is you're saying and doing on our behalf, then we're going to take action by removing you as a representative and putting someone else up there who actually understands what that word means, definition and action. So, yeah, go ahead.
To get back to your flyer, when you had up with Senator Goldfinch and his pledge to lower taxes, I really want to talk about this Senate 208, which has been dubbed by the national media the Yankee tax. I'm sure everybody's read about it. And basically what this bill does, it allows for the counties, and I think this has been misreported a lot, but it allows for the counties to institute a tax on people who will move into this state vis-a-vis the motor vehicles. And the tax basically amounts to a $500 tax, $500 more than South Carolina residents are paying to move into the state. Now, first of all, the idea that you're pitting one group against another just bothers me. People that move down here, I mean, they want to come down here because they want the quality of life. And look, you should accept them. From my perspective, you should accept them in the fact that they want to come and contribute to the economy. Hitting someone over the head with another $500.
It says lowering taxes. That's just for lowering taxes.
Well, that's because those are people that are here, right? But the people that are coming in, we're gonna raise taxes on. Now, my wife and I bought our place 5 years ago, and we moved down here 2 years ago, full time. So when I came down, obviously I had to pay that fee to change the title on my car. That was $300. Right, so that's $300. Right. Then you have to pay the property tax on that car, which even in New York you don't do. They have registration fees, but you don't pay I just paid my bill on my car was $360.
Yep.
So I paid that. So I paid the title and then I paid this tax. I also had to furnish my house. So I bought all my furniture, all new furniture for a 3-bedroom, 3-bath house. All of it I bought here, and I paid taxes on it. I paid taxes on my closing. I contribute to the tax base by shopping. We have a pretty high sales tax here in Horry County. Yes, you have that penny tax, and we piled up some good money, and good. That's a great thing. Right. But there are more than enough taxes that people pay to come in. I know people are going to say, well, you're coming down here, you're changing the quality of life. And that was his argument. Yeah, you're changing the quality of life. But as soon as you walk in the door, you've already paid quite a bit of money to get here. And another $500 that's going to aim for me, it's aimed directly at dividing people and to try to stop them from coming. Now, if you want to stop people from coming, I understand that. I mean, I think that the place is oversaturated. The idea that you've gotten into watersheds and messing with natural resources and messing with the water table and cutting some corners to build and everything. I understand if you want to limit that at the county level, that's fine. If you want to limit the construction of condominiums, which I think that's what they should do, if you're worried about density of population, hey, just approve 1-family houses and townhouses. That's it. No 5-story buildings, no 3-story buildings, no 4-story buildings. You want to limit it that way? That's great. But to stand up and introduce a tax and cite that the ideas are you want to raise this money for infrastructure. We don't have enough money for infrastructure. And to preserve wildlife and natural space, well, it's kind of disingenuous. You're allowing builders to come in here and destroy the place, the process.
Wasn't there something about a toll in there as well?
Oh, that's a whole nother bill. That's a separate bill that we could talk about later. The fact that tolls were even mentioned in the bill made me shake coming from New York. I mean, it's tolls. It's tolls everywhere. There's a toll in New York on the Triborough Bridge that it's $15 round trip, and you could drive a golf ball across that part of the river. I mean, if you're a good player,
right?
It's just crazy. But this idea that we need to raise taxes raise taxes again
Yep.
for infrastructure. Didn't we just pass a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill
I'll bring
at
that
the
back up
federal
again.
level? Well, where is South Carolina's share of that $1.5 trillion? I mean, if you do it proportionally, I think if you do the math, we should have got about between 25 and $30 billion out of that.
I know where
Where is
some of
it?
the money went, John. Our vice president was just here, Vice President Kamala Harris, and she was there to talk about high-speed internet. I think $65 billion was set aside out of the $1 trillion infrastructure bill to increase high-speed internet, and particularly in historically black colleges. That's what she was here to discuss. So listen, we may have trains being derailed. We may have planes that aren't taking off, near crashes. We have boats sitting off the shore that can't get their goods and things like here. And our roads are, pothole. We got pothole Pete out there. But hey, we're going to have high-speed internet, baby. You won't be able to drive anywhere, but you'll have high-speed internet.
I can't believe that it's 2023 and we're having this discussion. When I was in Catholic education up in New York back in 2000, the principal, Brother Frank, asked me if I help with development rather than just teaching.
Right.
And so I got into grant writing. And in 2000, I wrote a grant about the digital divide and the fact that students who had access to computers and the internet were far more likely to succeed academically than kids that didn't. That
Sure.
was 23 years ago. 23
Yep.
years ago. We have a Department of Education. We have they focus on the most ridiculous things. And the fact that people don't have access to the internet in 23 to me is mind-boggling. There's another thing we have to look at, and that's the role of corporate America here. If you are given, if you're given a right to provide cable service to communities, guess what? You should have to put a tower up, some sort of relay tower for the internet, and now they're talking about wiring everybody. I
But
would
do
think
you
it would be
think that
far easier
actually
to give.
fits into infrastructure? Do you think that is right where it should be? Do you think this high-speed internet should be lumped in with infrastructure? Is that something you
Well,
would agree with?
I think if it's below ground service, if everything's coming in below ground, you have to dig up roads to do it. I guess there should be some sort of cooperation there. But
Right.
part of me thinks that if you look at the money that they're going to throw into this, part of
Right.
me thinks that it would be far
65
easier.
billion.
Yeah, I would think that it would be far easier to outfit people with satellite dishes that brought in high-speed internet than to run cable everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
understand
Less
rural
expensive.
America's, yeah, rural America's tough.
Yeah.
But if you're going to start wiring people that are 30 miles off the highway, it's going to be a lot more expensive than just saying, hey, here's your dish. It's the best high-speed dish we got. Here's your receiver. You get TV, you get internet access, you
Yep.
got everything you want. And I know people say, well, but if it rains, you don't get it. It's not as bad as it used to be.
Right.
It's certainly far more efficient. But the fact that we're even having this discussion with all the money that the government has wasted, and the fact that, especially when you get to certain parts of the United States where the government has given contracts to certain providers, and there's nothing that comes along with that, as far as service to everybody. There was a two that should have been included in all of this, is that, and we all know that this is important, and I think you could get this under infrastructure too. When you travel, there are way too many dead spots in this country.
Yes.
Way
yes,
too many dead spots.
Yes.
If you have an emergency and you're on a highway and you have your phone, because this happened up in upstate New York, there was a woman who wasn't found because she was out of area. She had a
Right.
phone, had a ping on it. They couldn't detect it because there was no towers there.
Yeah.
Now, look, some of these companies, they're making, hundreds of billions of dollars
Right.
over a 10-year period. You can't put up towers for cell
That's
phone
absurd.
things. I'm not expecting to do our show while I'm driving. I get that.
Right.
But,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you should not be hitting dead spot after dead spot after dead spot, especially
Right.
when you're driving around in rural counties. That's insane. There should be towers that are put up. And
And it's
the
100%
government,
accurate, John, because
yeah.
I drive from here to York County, and the routes I sometimes take, I avoid the interstate just because of the traffic. And there are multiple times when it is a dead zone. There is no signal whatsoever. And I've been on the phone and I've had the calls drop repeatedly. So you're absolutely right. There are major problems with that.
Yeah, with all the things that the government does with our money that they shouldn't be doing with our money, there's something
Ukraine.
that they should have focused on 20 years ago when this first started. And the one thing our government rarely is proactive. They're rarely proactive. And here's something that should be in place because of safety issues and because of the fact that it's at the heart of education now. And the fact that children still do not have internet access in their house, to me, is mind-boggling.
Well, John, essentially, we can either have the end to dead spots for our services, or we can continue to have dead Russians, because that's the divide right now. Our money is being spent to kill Russians rather than to prevent dead spots.
Yeah, and it's not our money.
Right.
It's all borrowed money. That's money that we don't have.
Printed.
Yeah, they
exactly.
just go into the, as my dad used to say, I said, Dad, can I borrow $20? And he'd say, go in the bathroom and print one out. And that's basically what they do, get the machine going.
Yeah, get it printed out.
But the fact that this discussion is still going on in 2023 with all of it's about the children and education, it's just mind-boggling.
Speaking of children and education, before we wrap up, I want to mention two things. First, I want to congratulate Wendy Hodges. She was selected as the school board member to replace, I think it was District 4, which was previously David Cox's seat. He's now the chair of the school board. So congratulations to Wendy Hodges. And I also want to talk really quickly about an education bill. I guess we could call it an education bill that was presented by Representative Tim McGinnis. And I don't understand this bill either. It just seems like of all the things we could be talking about, this one doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He's put forward a bill in which he wants to allow students from North Carolina and Georgia to be waived from having to pay out-of-state tuition, that they would be granted in-state tuition. Now, my only question is that going to be, is there reciprocity there? Are we going to be able to send students from South Carolina to schools in North Carolina without paying out-of-state tuition? And can we send our students from South Carolina to schools in Georgia without having to pay the out-of-state tuition? And what's the purpose for this? I mean, why? Why is this something that's needed? I mean, what citizen of South Carolina came to you and said, Representative McGinnis, I just feel like we're just making kids from North Carolina and Georgia pay too much to go to school here in Horry County? I don't understand that.
I remember reading previously that down in the College of Charleston, they were thinking about getting rid of it completely, that there would only be one tuition. There wouldn't be any in-state tuition and then out-of-state tuition. Now, that's a budgetary issue for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as far as anytime you're going state to state, right? If you involve more than one state and there is any type of legal issue, you've involved the federal government.
Yeah.
So my thought is, whenever I hear something, well, allow people from Georgia, North Carolina to come to South Carolina for education and they get to pay the in-state tuition, you've just involved the federal government, whether you wanted to or not.
Yeah.
And anytime you
and that's
go
to
that's interstate commerce.
Yeah.
So now you might be allowing them. I'm not saying this is the case, but it probably is. You've allowed the federal government to insert themselves into the conversation, and I think that should be avoided at all costs.
Absolutely. I think Ronald Reagan had it right when you want to talk about the worst thing you can hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That's not ever the case. They don't help us, they hurt us. So whether it's our federal government, whether it's our state government, whether it's our political parties, I'll go back really quickly and talk again about the state SCGOP allowing these flyers to be sent out with erroneous, if not outright lies, sent out in flyers, and it being quote unquote authorized by the SCGOP. Again, I will wait with bated breath to hear from our illustrious chairman, Drew McKissick, to explain what authorized by the SCGOP means. Is that, again, something that's voted on by the state ECs? Because if that's the case, Mike Conant and I may disagree on a lot of things, but I'm fairly confident that he would agree allowing these type of flyers to be sent out on behalf of state senators with absolutely provably false information on them is not something I believe that Mike would have agreed to. And so that then leads me to believe that this was a decision made by the one and only Drew McKissick, which in that case, I have serious reservations about having him do that. And it calls into question whether it's not time for a new chairman. And in the next month, this coming month, which I think tomorrow is March 1st, we're going to be hosting reorganization. And folks, if you're not actively involved in the party in Horry County, I encourage you to do so. It is absolutely paramount that you get involved, because it is within the party where a lot of these decisions in terms of who's going to be running for what offices are made. and it's less than 1% of the population that gets involved. So you have a lot more power than you even realize you have. And so, are you okay with your neighbor making that decision for you, or do you want to have some control over who it is goes out there and represents us in elected office? So please get involved. If you have questions or concerns or want to know how to get involved, you can message me and John right here in the comment section on Facebook, or send us a tweet, or you can email us at our email, palmettopolitics at gmail.com, I believe is what it is, and let us know what your concerns are, and we'll get you that information as quickly as possible. We appreciate everybody tuning in, and stay tuned. Thursday, we'll be back to talk about more things. But that's all I got. Anything else from you, John?
One thing I'd like to say is, if not now, when? As far as your involvement, now is the time, because now is when we need you. You can no longer be a spectator.
Right. Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time here Thursday morning, 9:30 a.m. Godspeed.